let's start off, I think, with Formula 2, as we should. Before the season even began, we had quite a lot of interesting penalties. Max Esterson, Emil Cordial, Alex Doon, and Jack Crawford all received $10,000 fines to the team, and they both all had 10-place grid penalties for both the sprint and eventually the cancelled feature. Now, this was because they had included sensors that was on the car, and fitting non-regulated sensors during the Barcelona test a couple of weeks ago, and it was a modification of a non-standard part. You boys should know all about that from NASCAR in the past couple of weeks as well, with all those changes. So they've had their penalty imposed. They've also subsequently been banned from the in-season test, and the other teams have been allowed to take part in that test and run the same sensor that was a breach of the original regulations. So they've all got the same data, because F2 is a spec series, but the engines are massively different thanks to the inconsistency of Mechachrome. And indeed, on the Friday after the qualifying and practice sessions, it was discovered that the teams who were having issues with some software inside these cars, that we saw several cars spinning off and causing red flags in practice, because as soon as the cars had a spin, they weren't able to get restarted. So we actually had a shakedown session that was not broadcast. It was completely unofficial, and it was not a regulated practice session. The cars went out for 15 minutes to test whether or not they could work. They did a range of settings, and then they came back into the pit lane. That was on Saturday morning. Now, the FAA was very happy with what they saw. So was Formula 2 and the team. So the sprint race was allowed to go on. Now, technically speaking, the F2 sprint race was after the F3 and F1 practice 3. It was sort of in between F1 practice 3 and qualifying, but we'll go through it first because it is the higher on the list. And it was Joshua Durskin who continued his form from late last year with a commanding victory in Albert Park in the sprint race as well. Halfway through last season, he got a brand new engine and was able to really utilize it for a late charge in the championship, but it came too late for him to be a points-bearing member. Here, however, he started off well, and the AIX squad, in their first official full season with this branding and this team as well, they have gone straight in to the top as well. It was an interesting one. Brilliant start off second on the grid for Durskin. Got ahead of Leonardo Forlaroli, who's the Formula 3 champion from last year. Into turn one, it was very good for them. Got a move done easy. Luke Browning held off as well for third place to go through. Virtual safety car was out. Victor Martin stopped at turn 6. He hit the barrier exit turn 5, just dislodged the car, and it had to come to a stop. We did resume, but Forlaroli slow to the restart from Browning. Held off from P2, so they pretty much stayed in order throughout the entirety of the race. Mini was on the inside for a lot of Jose Maria Marti. Mini also graduating up from Formula 3 and battling Marti, now entering his third season of the championship. We had another safety car as Max Esterson spun into the gravel trap at turn 6. That was in dry conditions, and again stalled the car, and was meaning that we had to have another safety car coming in. Racing resumed up 11. Durskin on the first start went way too early and sort of almost jumped everybody because he went at the exit of turn 12. Not really the best place to go, because you're into the breakers down for 13-14, so the drivers behind know they can gain speed on you quite easily. But this time he learned, dropped at the exit of 13, put pedal down, and got a great exit and a great restart. He really did control it, was gone. Simon Megatuna spun into the gravel at turn 10. That caused the, third safety car. We resumed lap 7 of 23, and it was all going well at the end of the race. It just finished without the need for another safety car interference, I should say. And it was Durskin, Forlaroli, Browning completing out the podium. Points dropped to 8th, so it was Pepe Marti, Jose Maria Marti, got the last points paying position. Look at Sebastian Montoya in that mix as well. All those Indianapolis fans out there, his father, Juan Pablo Montoya, double Indy 500 champion as well, and kart champion. His father very much in the paddock still, and was enjoying seeing his son race out there, including battling his old rival and now teammate Gabriel Mini side to side sometimes in the race as well. Onto the feature, Gabriel Mini was due to start on pole position for that race, but received a penalty which dropped in 3 places. So it was Victor Martins who started on pole, but after a horrendous amount of rain dropped, that resulted in the F3 feature race that we'll get onto later being stopped early. F2 was next out, and it was an hour and 25 minutes later. In between the F3 and F2, we had a supercars race that had to get abandoned. Then we had the F2. We delayed the start for 15 minutes. Then we ran behind the safety car for 2 laps. Then the red flag came out. Then we restarted the race behind the safety car. It was still too wet. It got wetter, and the race was brought into the pit lane. We actually started ticking the timer down with what was scheduled to be a 12-lap race inside 24 minutes of action. But the red flag came out with 11 minutes to go of the whole race. We didn't even get a green flag, so the race officially was cancelled and no points will be awarded for that event. Bar Victor Martins, who, because he inherited pole position from Gabriel Mini's pole on Friday, where you get a point for pole position, Victor Martins, after not qualifying on pole, not getting points in the sprint race, managed to get a point in a cancelled feature race for something he didn't do on Friday because the stewards gave a penalty to the guy who did. Make that make sense. F2 was crazy to start this weekend. If you want crazy, go back to Formula 3 as well with their sprint race. Now, they've got a whole new generation of car this year, Formula 3, and it really is better racing. Immediately better. We got up to 13-inch wheels, what Formula 1 originally had before we moved to 18. So think what those look like on the 2001 cars. You can imagine those on a new super-duper hyped-up Formula 3 car. Saturday's race was fantastic from the minute the lights went out, despite the fact we're still challenging some of the names to bring you. It was fantastic. Wheel-to-wheel action throughout. Drama as soon as it is. It was Santiago Ramos held firm into turn 1. Belinsky as well had to fight past Martin Steinshaw as well further up the field, but that was a late dive into turn 4. Got the move done. Campos looked well with Tanas pulling to Pruvazak. For most of the sprint race, it was a 5-way fight at the front of the field that went down the whole way between Ramos, Steinshaw, Belinsky into Pruvazak, and Zagazita was in there, but he dropped back later on in the race. He was second into turn 9, but dropped back, as we said. Safety car virtual was brought out after Charlie Wirtz stopped at turn 5 and needed to be recovered. So that came out. Green flag on lap 3 before an eventual safety car was called as Rafael Kamara, Lawrence Van Hopen were pushed into the gravel from James Wharton, who is the local hero here in Australia. He went straight on at turn number 11, sort of locked up, clipped the pair of them. He ended up back in the pit lane with a broken wishbone. Van Hopen as well in the gravel with Rafael Kamara. Kamara, who was on pole for the feature race on Sunday. Tanasa Polly into Pruzak was interesting at the start with the restart having a battle side by side down to 2-1, ended up in a 3-wide moment. But it was Tramnitz who had been back up to 5th place after passing in the safety car as well. Lap 9, Ramos held the lead with a perfect restart as well. Lap 13, Steinshaw got a good run and forced Fullerelli off, but forced Ramos off, but didn't really work out. He had the traction. It was pretty much a side by side. Imagine what we saw in NASCAR a couple of weeks ago at COTA. That's how we had it for around about 11 laps. It was absolutely amazing. Did have a final safety car with 5 laps to go as Bruno Di Pino and Javier Segarra as well. Segarra, who was interviewed by our colleague and friend Omi on the podcast with Jamie Motorsports a couple of weeks ago, who of course lost the Euro Cup 3 Formula title after a penalty was imposed in Paris by the Motorsport Council as well. Christian Hogue becoming the champion for that as well later on. But by the time the safety car came out with 5 to go, we actually couldn't restart the race. So it ended behind the safety car, as you can see, with Ramos taking the race win. From Steinshaw and Belinsky and Taras Puvazak would have had the podium. He said, I had the tyres, I had the car, I would have jumped him on the restart. Couldn't work out. On to the feature race then. This was Another one because it was the first race after the rainstorm. The rain had lightened up compared to an hour before, where you could literally see that Albert Park was more of a skiing resort than a actual race, water skiing that is, than a racetrack. Several laps behind the safety car as well, but we did get racing with a rolling start. But before the end of the first lap, Nikola Soloff and Callum Vossi went off at turn 10 in an accident, brought out the safety car again. That led until lap 6, when Kamara re-established a healthy gap to Stromstad in second. Eventually, though, we had another safety car as the rain picked up on lap 11, and it was lap 13 as well, where Christian Ho into the barriers at turn 7, several laps behind the safety car again, and unfortunately the red flag came out and suspended the running, with the race not being resumed due to the conditions getting far too worse, and the safety standards for Formula 3 are a lot more. With the new regulation of car, they didn't want to risk it, so unfortunately it ended before it even began. Only 2 laps really running on full power in the feature race on Sunday. Thankfully, Formula 1 got more running in, and we had a more entertaining race. But if anybody stayed out for the F3, F2 feature races on Sunday, I deeply, deeply apologise, because it wasn't much. But there you go. That's everything that happened in Formula 3 and Formula 2. In Melbourne, the next time they're running will be in Bahrain in a month's time. But we have got F1 Academy next month.